Welcome back. This is still Good Morning Nigeria, live on the network service of the NTA. And to begin our conversation this morning, which is on the review of the G20 summit, let's take a look at this background report put together by our correspondent, Oyeyemi Ajayi.
The Group of 20, G20, is the premier forum for international economic cooperation. It plays an important role in shaping and strengthening global architecture and governance on all major international economic issues. The G20 was founded in 1999 after the Asian financial crisis as a forum for the finance ministers and central bank governors to discuss global economic and financial issues. In Brazil, the G20 Leaders Summit was held on November 18 and 19, 2024 in Rio de Janeiro, with the presence of the leaders of 19 member countries, plus the African Union and the European Union. This provides an opportunity for Nigeria to continue in its bid to be part of this group. The first session of the summit focused on major concerns of the world, which is poverty, being compounded by COVID-19. Nigeria is one of the 19 guest countries this year, and the second consecutive time under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu.
Investment in health, in investment in food security, cheaper financing, de-risking various African countries, putting us on a better and more progressive arrangement to prioritize food security and agricultural reforms are necessary.
The National Bureau of Statistics projected that more than 40% of Nigerians will be living below the poverty line by the end of 2024. And that explains why the Nigerian president can relate for an all-inclusive growth while emphasizing that the fight against poverty is not a matter of choice, but must be made a priority, especially with the investment in education, health, and agriculture. Talking about the challenges confronting Africa with emphasis including insecurity, multidimensional poverty, and cases of out-of-school children, President Tinubu said his administration has embarked on aggressive reform to form basis for developmental programs, while calling the world to support African development. Now, with all these proposals by the Nigerian president be well implemented, especially in favor of Africa? Also, are there potentials of Nigeria being admitted into the fold? Our guests will be answering these questions and more.
Many thanks, Oyeyemi Ajayi, for that background report. Let's get to business. And let me introduce our guests here in the studio, beginning with Idi Mukhtar Maiha, who is the Minister of Livestock Development. A pleasure to welcome you to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you. Good morning.
Also joining us here, we have Professor Mohammed Kuta Yahaya, Secretary, Presidential Livestock Implementation Committee. We thank you for coming.
Good morning, Nigeria.
Yeah, right.
All right, also joining us for the conversation is Dr. Adoyi Matthew Omale, an international affairs analyst. Many thanks for joining us.
Good morning and thanks for having me.
Also joining us for the conversation all the way from our Lagos studio is Dr. Godwin Ichimi, an associate professor and acting director, International Cooperation and Public Affairs, Nigeria Institute for International Affairs, NIIA. Many thanks for joining us, Dr. Ichimi.
This set.
International Affairs, NIIA.
Let's begin this conversation with the Honorable Minister, particularly because you were on ground and your ministry appears to be one of the big beneficiaries of the G20 summit. But let me ask, what were the objectives of the president going into the G20 summit? And would you say he achieved all that he set out to achieve with it?
Thank you very much. The G20 summit has come and gone. It's basically, although we were not part of the presidential team to the G27, our own remit was to do some sideline discussions with private entrepreneurs in the agro-allied sector. But nonetheless, I think it has been a huge success. Nigeria was there loud and clear, and it has also been able to promote South-South cooperation. As you can see, the fallout from what we've been able to get out of the Brazil. So by and large, the issue, as the president just said, has been that of emphasizing the need for global cooperation to fight hunger, want, and deprivation. The issue of safety from hunger, the issue of food and nutrition security across particularly the developing countries, as well as the issue of tackling issues of climate change and the ripple effect of climate change in the ecosystem generally. This has been emphatically been put there by Mr. President, and I think this has been heard loud and clear, and I do believe that that outing was a huge success for the government.
All right, Honorable Minister, before we talk about the deal, the 2.5 billion deal with the Brazilian company as regards the livestock industry in this country, let's talk about a significant outcome of the G-20 summit, and that will be the launch of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, which you just mentioned, and President Tinubu promised to abide by the core demands of the Global Pact. But, I'd like you to speak to our situation right here in the country, and if you think that the promise made by the president will be met, considering the fact that at the moment, food inflation is up at 39.16%. That's over 7.64% than what it was last year, looking at October statistics. And the fact that the consumer purchasing power of the average Nigerian is going down year on year. So how do you think that promise by the president will be made, will come to fruition, looking at the current realities?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, these indices you have mentioned are there, but progressively, if you look at the focus going into 2025, it's quite brilliant. The issue of inflation, for instance, the focus has indicated that inflation is going to head down south. That's one. Number two, if you look at the performance of the economy, there was just yesterday or the day before yesterday, also 3.something% growth. These are quite positive indices and performance indicators that point to the fact that, yes, the presidential commitment will be met in due course. And also do not forget that progressively as well, a number of other policies that have been put in place in terms of food production and general productivity in the economy is also going to register positive growth. So by and large, we do believe that with the stabilization of flashpoints in the country, with the improvement in terms of agro inputs, etc., the president will be able to curb and all these wild statistics, tame the statistics, as well as realize the issue of reducing of hunger and poverty in the country.
Now, all of this, the participation and the much we were able to get out of it, would you say that, it aligns with the country's national development priorities?
Yeah, basically one will say that without any fear of contradiction, basically. And that is like I've indicated, there are concerted efforts actually to put all these things in place for better results for everybody in the country.
What does the $2.5 billion deal, what does it mean for Nigeria?
Well, 2.5 billion, even if you are counting stones, is not a mean achievement, talk less of dollars. It's a very huge success for the country. And we do believe that by the time this deal has come to be implemented, you will physically see a lot of changes in the economy.
What's the deal about, actually?
Let me get there. The deal is about 3 Brazilian companies that are global players today by any standard, who have committed to come and invest $2.5 billion in Nigerian livestock sector and the agricultural arm. Now, if you look at the Brazilian economy, for instance, if we focus on the livestock sector, Brazil, by any standard today, is the leader. The cattle industry in Brazil, the cattle population was about 230 million. JBS company that has committed to this deal is the global leader in process and export of beef and poultry. BRF, the second player, is the second or the largest exporter of steel poultry of pig meat globally. The Best Way seed company is also a major player globally in terms of seed propagation, genetic development, and propagation of seeds across the world. Now, having these three companies to agree to commit to come and invest in Nigeria in itself is a sign of confidence. It's a sign of belief that yes, it is happening. Nigeria is open for business, and we are interested to come to Nigeria. Number one, the scale of operation, the global reach. JBS turnover in 2023 was $72.3 billion. And this is a company that has agreed to come to and invest in Nigeria. There is no other demonstration to say that, yes, this company is coming, and you don't need any other proof. This company is, by any standards, the biggest exporter of meat in the country, in the world. Now, they are in over 150 countries. They are exporting all over the world. In fact, the only market they have in Africa is South Africa. They are into China, they are into Saudi Arabia, they are into UAE, they are into US, and a number of other countries. So they have agreed to come here and invest. Secondly, the seed company we are talking about, we visited their facilities, we have seen everything, and the performance of their seeds. Again, you can begin to imagine that the yield per hectare in this country is probably 2 to 3 hectares per hectare when you're talking about sorghum or corn. Their seeds and agronomic practices are the best anywhere. They are almost hitting 12, 13 tons per hectare. So these are the companies that have agreed to come here and invest in Nigeria. So the total package of all put together is $2.5 billion. Now, Nigeria is going to benefit hugely from this. And if you want me to drive down, for instance,
by all means,
if you take, for instance, meat processing. In this country, we are not optimizing in the byproducts of meat processing. If you take the example of a cow, for instance, our abattoirs are suboptimal in terms of performance. We lack the legislation and the proper infrastructure to ensure that all animals that are processed in one place, so that all the byproducts are aggregated and turned into wealth. Let me give you an example. The blood of a cow in an abattoir drains into a blood bank, and this is turned into fish meal. Where the abattoirs are not up to standard in terms of design and operations, you waste these products. Meat should be deboned. By the time you debone meat, after processing the cow, the bones are crushed, are also exported. The hoofs are exported. The horns are exported. The solid waste, that is the feces, also turn into organic fertilizer. And now you're talking about the meat. So all these things are not harnessed in this country, and simply because the lack of legislation and proper infrastructure so that you can harness all these things. Imagine in a city or in a settlement where 200 animals are slaughtered in different areas. You don't aggregate those byproducts we're talking about. So in their own ecosystem, there is no waste. Completely there is no waste. And all these things are exportable, they are usable, there are other industrial byproducts. So these are the kind of investment that is coming to this country. Again, if you look at the operating system, for instance, of JBS, they have feedlots. But what attracts that relationship between us and them, and what model we want to adopt here is a model of the outgrower farmer supply system, where you have a number of feedlotters, a number of people who are into cattle fattening. Now we receive standards of husbandry management from the company, fatten their animals, and then supply as off-takers. This stands to create thousands of jobs for our youth in this country. It's going to open up a lot of the presently locked up value chains. In terms of, number one, you get feed millers, you get commercial pasture cultivators, you get also a large number of animal health workers who are also going to be involved.
Okay.
So you can see there is a ripple effect in terms of employment generation and wealth creation. And then finally, poverty elimination.
All right, poverty elimination. That's one aspect we'll talk about. We'll see if it's possible to eliminate it in a country like ours. But let's get to our other guests now. Many thanks, Honorable Minister Meha. Let's get to Professor Muhammad Kota Yahaya, Secretary Presidential Livestock Implementation Committee. First, before we talk about your specific, which is livestock implementation, let's look at the overview of this G20 summit. Some Nigerians in some quarters think that Nigeria's participation wasn't important. In your own view and the outcome, and listening to the minister, what's your perception about the whole visit and the outcomes?
Well, I'm very privileged and honored to have been part of that delegation. And with my co-chairman, Professor Atairu Jega, we're on the same train with the Honorable Minister of Livestock and the Honorable Minister of State Food Security, Agriculture and Food Security. We had a very extensive tour of the site, as the Honorable Minister said, and it's a fallout of the relationship between Brazil and Nigeria, which Mr. President is the chief salesman and promoter. Mr. President has done us a great favor by giving us that opportunity that would have eluded us if not for that exposure, because Brazil has conquered poverty. Brazil has engineered prosperity through its livestock sector. We saw it live and direct. And by and large, what Mr. President has done is that he's a part of the global players. For you to have the world leaders on the same table, and he advocating for some of the desirable changes, especially in terms of food security, climate change, which are some of the topical issues that are affecting us as a nation. We are not in isolation. So therefore, for me, whoever thought that Nigerian participation, where you have world leaders seated on the same table with our president, is not important, is that person is not a patriotic Nigerian. Because for us, we saw how Brazilians love their country, how patriotism has become an order. And therefore, we think that we as Nigerians, we must of necessity love our country. We must think Nigeria first, no matter the circumstance. Nothing lasts forever. Whatever circumstance we find ourselves, we are the sources of the solution. And part of this trip, I could see hope. I see a kind of radical change that is coming up. Because in Brazil, rural-urban migration has been tamed. Some of the places we visited where these factories are sited are no more than 80,000 people. But they have all the facilities that you can imagine, from airstrip to modern facilities. So they have been able to tame rural-urban migration. And that is fundamental in development. The agricultural sector is flourishing. There is massive job creation. In JBS, the minister mentioned, they are operating on shift. 300 workers on continuous duty on shift, 2 shifts per day. And the entire mechanized setting is amazing. And they are processing and developing the sector, creating employment opportunity, creating opportunities for wealth creation. That alone, with Nigerian having to sign a deal of $2.5 billion, is like a company. JBS, the minister said the last year's turnover was $72 billion. Already, as at November 2024, their turnover, according to the chief executive officer, is $79 billion. So that means they're likely going to do almost $100 billion this year. What's the budget of many countries around the world, around the G20 itself? So you can imagine one company with that, and they are coming to invest in your country. That means they are going to import their technologies, they are going to transfer their technologies, there will be human capacity development and benefit for the citizens. So as far as I'm concerned, we have a window of opportunity to conquer poverty by this development. We have an opportunity to create wealth, because today Brazil holds the record of the lowest cost of production of chicken, the lowest cost of production of beef, because the ingredients required for production are in abundance, particularly soybean. Brazil is the largest producer of soybean, and corn, from the technologies, with almost 12 to 13 tons per hectare production, where many countries are on 1.2 or 1.5 tons per hectare. You can imagine getting those technologies back to our country. It will amplify production, it will reduce food security, it will enhance productivity in terms of livestock. Because, for example, the outgrowers within the enclave of some of these industries are able to produce chicken in 42 days. They supply the inputs, and those inputs assist the farmers to produce massively and to feed the industry. So there is a value chain of activities from producers to even the consumers. And globally, what will excite you is that there are specific off-takers from around the world. Many prefer certain parts of the product. For example, Japan preferred hearts of chicken, is massively produced and exported to Japan. Many countries in Latin America are benefiting. And then even the cold chain system is a whole lot of value chain development that can create employment if properly harnessed. So for us, farmers who are going to go into pasture production, who are going to go into forage that will be used for livestock, will have a new deal. For example, or either to, before now, many countries were demanding for production of like alfalfa. Niger State government has signed an agreement with Al Marai of Saudi Arabia to produce alfalfa in millions of dollars. And an experiment conducted in Mokwa, the protein content that they desire by UAE was 8%. Mokwa produced 15%. So that means our capacity. And now you can see the window of opportunity created by Mr. President. The new Badagry-Sokoto road is going to pass through Niger State, which has the largest landmass in Nigeria. And already there are about 8 irrigation sites along that route. So that means there will be production of food or pasture. And already the Niger State governor, who was part of that delegation, had offered to provide 1.2 million hectares of land for the JBS to start with. So we are going to have the benefit of massive production of ingredients that will be required by this industry, like food, and already we are already having an advantage. You produce for both human and for livestock consumption. As the minister said, we are going to have outgrowers for livestock as we have for crops. And the good news is that this will engineer the process of governmental support to the livestock sector in terms of financing. We had supported crop production in the near past. Now this is a window of opportunity for Nigeria to support the livestock sector. And our committee had come with different, indicators, about 3,000 performance indicators as at the last count.
3,000.
3,000 performance indicators for the livestock sector. And one of them is the creation of Ministry of Livestock Development, which Mr. President had done, appointed a minister and deployed all the resources with landmark features, including an office complex that is the best of its kind that you can see anywhere in Abuja, in the central business district area of Abuja. And they have directed the Honorable Minister of Minister of FCT to renovate and furnish that place for the ministry to take off. So you can imagine, out of those 3,000 indicators, there are a lot that have to do with the entire value chain of agriculture, of livestock sector. And livestock is not only about cattle.
All right.
It's about piggery, it's about poultry, it's about even small animals.
We'd have to pause you. We're talking about the G-20 summit. Of course, if we give you all the time, you want to tell us about livestock ministry and all that it would mean for the country. But let's quickly get to Dr. Omale now, as we continue the conversation on the fallout of the G-20 summit. I'd like you to first and foremost give us your overview of how the summit went, some of the comments made by our president, and then what was brought back. This deal, for example, what does this mean for us?
Thank you very much. To me, the summit was a huge success. Huge success because the way to go is through multilateralism. The G20 constitutes a very, very important institution in international politics because most of the industrialized countries of the world belong to the G20. Therefore, it is an opportunity for Nigeria to collaborate with these industrialized countries. And Mr. President sees the opportunity to make the position of Nigeria known and to also highlight what Nigeria needs from the G20, especially in the area of poverty eradication, improving our economy and so on. So to that extent, it was a very, very important meeting that Nigeria could not have afforded to not to attend, especially that we were invited specially. We were one of the 5 countries that were invited to participate, to have that meeting with the G20 because Nigeria is strategically located. Just like Brazil, we are the most populous black nation on earth. And this invitation was extended to our president because of the stabilizing role that we are playing in Africa. If you solve the problems that are grappling Nigeria, you have solved a lot of problems in Africa. So by inviting Nigeria and by our president participating, it shows our the type of respect that the international community, especially the G20, have for our country. On the issue of the takeaway from the summit, yes, 2.5 billion is not a small money, running into trillions of naira. And for us to have this deal, it's very, very important. Especially, I'm going to look at it from the political economy angle. If this deal, if it succeeds, because for now it's in the pipeline, if it succeeds, like my other panelists have said, it's going to really transform a lot of the economy, especially in the agriculture or livestock sector. Why am I saying that? We know that we are even grappling with insecurity, and one of the problem of insecurity is the endemic poverty, especially in the northern parts of the country. And when they bring these resources in, it is going to keep a lot of the idle and population and youthful population busy. My joy is that the livestock sector in Nigeria is very, very underdeveloped. I'm happy the minister is here. We like the other panelists have said before me, they pumping that type of huge amount into the livestock sector. To my mind, we transform that sector. That sector is key to addressing some of the challenges that we are facing in the north. Our livestock sector is still basically subsistence in nature. You can imagine the nomads, in the bushes, young boys who are supposed to be in school, they are tending to cattle, moving from the north to the south. I'll be happy if this type of deal will lead to what the federal government has tried in the past, establishing nomadic education, establishing the life for transformation plan and so on. If this type of money or resources is moved into the country, and it will help solve the issue of farmer-seller clashes, it will solve the issue of moving from one place to another with large herds of cattle and so on, I will be happier for it. And I think having a global effort towards containing some of the challenges we have in this country will help jumpstart our economy, like others have said. The deal, from what the minister has said, is not just about livestock. In a state like Benue, which is the highest producer of soya bean, they need to also enter into partnership. The federal or the livestock ministry also need to enter into partnership with state governments, like he said about Niger State, so that there could be a holistic plan. The takeaway from the G20 can trickle down into the state and local governments, because that is the closest area to the grassroots, so that it can be harnessed, and then we can have a whole plan. In the 70s and 80s, we used to have this development plan, and Operation Feed the Nation, and several other plans that we have had. Under the last government, we have the National Livestock Transformation Program. Now that the president has gone to bring this type of quantum deal for our economy, we have to maximize the benefit. And the only way we can maximize the benefit is to ensure that it trickles down from the top to the bottom. We need to go beyond the subsistence level of agriculture. You see that even in terms of poultry farming, you see that it is done so haphazardly. There's no really coordinated plan to tackle some of these livestock programs. Why I say that is because to groom a chicken now, if you're in the market, you see that one chicken is costing close to 10 to 15,000, depending on the size. And it's mainly because of the feed. The minister talked about fisheries. Having a fish pond now is very, very expensive. And that is where this type of collaboration the president has gone and brought is very, very important. In fact, I never knew that it was the blood of cattle that sometimes can be used for feeding fish. With this type of development, if our abattoirs, if this money can be brought in and our abattoirs can be standardized, instead of all these wastages. If you go to the abattoir, you see a lot of bones, you see a lot of animal parts being wasted. Look at hides and skin. We are eating it as momo. You know, it's a delicacy that we are just wasting it. Hides and skin alone can transform the Nigerian economy. So if this company can come in, and then we can even sensitize our people. Instead of eating this momo, we can use it to produce leather works, furniture, shoes, and several other things that will benefit our economy. I'm not saying that momo consumption can be totally eliminated, because it's almost a culture in some parts of this country to eat momo. But you see, on a serious note, if we bring in this company, and I don't know whether the component of the agreement, the Honorable Minister is here, include building, processing companies or within the country, or processing units within the country, maybe in each of the 36 states. I don't know the component of the agreement. That will go a long way in helping in processing meat, in processing the byproducts of meat, of cattle, and other livestock that we may
All
have.
right.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Male. Let's head to Lagos, where we have Dr. Godwin Ichimi. We thank you very much for your patience. And of course, you have the benefits. You've had the benefit of listening to the other guests here with us in the studio. Perhaps you want to give us your own assessment of the just concluded G20 summit. Part of it is that the African Union was formally welcomed to the fold as a permanent member. And, you know, what this means for Nigeria as part of Africa. And then we are talking about the deal. There's been a lot said about it. Are we ready for such a deal? Of course, in terms of the structures that we have in place, the bureaucracy. And I hope we will deal with corruption as well.
Very much. Once again, good morning, fellow panelists and Nigerians. Mr. Moderator, you have given me quite a very long list of issues to address. Let me see if I can meander around these matters, and we'll have a cohesive discussion going forward. To start with, I want to congratulate Mr. President for a successful outing at the G20 summit. I call his outing successful, but whether I can call the entire processes that the G20 and issues that the G20 dealt with successful, only time will tell. The jury is still out on that. I am congratulating Mr. President because I like the very brilliant way in which he combined things that are particularly strategic and of immediate import for our national development on all fronts. Of all the issues that are being trashed here today, I want to connect two of them. The multilateral treaty on combating hunger and poverty, along with the quest to reform global institutions. I am sure that we all noticed the way Mr. President started from the domestic level, addressing his audience on the things that his government is doing and had done in the past in order to tackle some of the pressing challenges that is confronting Nigeria, particularly in the area of food security. Now, for me, that is the point of departure. And I want to tie everything Mr. President is saying to the fact that, yes, a lot of challenges and responsibilities rest at the level of the nation state and the government that is driving the affairs at those states. But we must not forget that there are also external complements to these issues. I am very excited at the things the Honorable Minister is saying and the attraction of investment at that level. But some of these discussions sometimes forget that in the short and medium term, there is a clear structure of particular sectors of the economy that we must deal with. What is the major characteristics of the agricultural sector in Nigeria? When we talk about the food system in Africa, what are we really looking at? We're talking about small peasant holdings of maybe 2 or 3 acres, driven mostly by people in the rural areas, particularly women that constitute the bulk of our agricultural force. How do the regimes of multilateral institutions and the kind of things that they promote and support, how does it interface with the productive capacities of these producers at this level? What these regimes and the economic systems that they promote do is that they combine different shades of the food system. So, for example, you have these small peasant agricultural producers, and then you have the agro-business organizations, multinational agro-businesses with the kind of capacity that the Honorable Minister has talked to us about. What do we do? Because we know that the agricultural sector is the largest employer of labor, particularly in the rural areas. And when we talk about the informal economy, which is also the largest, a substantial part of what is going on there is agriculture, is agro-based and agro-allied. Mr. O'Malley, I think I got the name right, or Dr. O'Malley, I think I got the name right, talked about food production system in Benue State. Again, there you will see the kind of structure that I am talking about. So, the framing and consolidation of the logic of global institutions as they bring these things together, as they subject them to market forces, must be clearly understood in terms of what they imply for our local production capacities in Africa in general and Nigeria in particular. When we talk about productivity, it is not just domestic production that we are talking about. We are also talking about external complements that has to do with things like exportation. When we export, what is the extent of the access that we have to international market? What are we saying and doing about the declining rate of commodity prices? What are the other regimes of, for example, taking the WTO, the regimes on trade and investment, the regimes on intellectual property rights, and all the various standards and rules of the WTO? How does that impact on local productivity? These are the things I am sure we are running through the mind of Mr. President when he called for the reform of the major multilateral institutions of the world that are connected to the kind of things that the G20 is talking about. We can add also the IMF, the World Bank, and the likes. the various policies that they pursue have direct implication for critical sectors like agriculture. So the point I'm trying to point out here is that while we are doing all of these things at the level of the nation state, while Mr. President and his team are putting on their thinking caps, addressing issues, raising new ones, forging new collaborations, etc., he has used the opportunity of the G20 to call attention to the arguments that have been on the table now for a very, very long time, that there is a critical need to review the modus operandi of these multilateral institutions. Now, Mr. Moderator, you asked me earlier the implication for Africa. Africa is the second largest continent in the world. The G20 is clearly a very powerful alternate center of global economic and political power. It is therefore in the interest of the G20 itself to be very conscious of the things that are going on the African continent. The issues which sometimes are paraded as African problems, as Nigerian problems, as Ghanaian problems, they have serious international implications. When we talk about climate change and all of those things, it is easy to connect their international dimensions and call global meetings and sessions. But sometimes when we talk about poverty, when we talk about food insecurity, there is a tendency to collapse that and limit them within the structure of the state in question. And what Mr. President has done at G20 to say, hey, food insecurity in Nigeria, in Ghana, in the whole of Africa is actually food insecurity for the world. Because if you look at the latest report coming from the Food and Agricultural Organization, we are told that in no distant time from now, close to 730 million people will have their food insecure conditions consolidated in such a manner that will be very difficult for the international system to reverse. The World Food Programme is telling us that of the 530 million people that will be chronically malnourished, with all the implications that that has for global productivity, a significant portion of that will be in Africa. And like I keep saying, the international system is not doing Africa a favor. There is an organic connection between some of the global policies that have been pursued by these multilateral institutions and the objective conditions that is on ground presently in Africa, and why it has become chronically difficult to overcome these challenges. Before anybody accuses me of dumping our responsibility for national transformation on the international system, let me reiterate, ladies and gentlemen and Nigerians, that I am not saying that the government should abdicate its responsibility. I am not saying that we don't have a role to play. But I am underscoring the fact that these challenges have international dimensions. And yes, it is good to attract foreign investment. Okay? But our president has done very well in saying, I may do all that I can. I may attract these foreign investments, but there are rules of engagement. The entire neoliberal order and the way it promotes foreign investment and production and distribution and consumption of global resources make it particularly difficult to overcome some of these entrenched practices. So, I join Mr. President, I join Nigerians in congratulating Mr. President for not letting the world forget that while we are doing our bit here, the world also needs to do its bit. At the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, we recognize this. And that is why one of the youngest units that have been added to that institution is the Center for Trade and Investment. There is a need to critically begin to interrogate the character of the trade and investment that we attract, and to ensure that ultimately they are in sync with our peculiar economic, political, and strategic considerations. The character of the trade and investment.
Much, Dr. Ichimi. You have so much to say, but you know we're trying to manage time here and deal with the issues. Thank you so much for your comments. And then you talking about reminding the world that you know the hunger and the poverty in Africa, you know, is their business. Some have come out to say that Nigeria has no business being among the countries suffering hunger and you know poverty because Nigeria's slow development is not caused by natural disasters or lack of resources, both human and material, but fundamentally bad government policies inconsistencies, as well as implementation framework assisted by strong institutional lockdown as the major problem, which of course if it's fixed, you know, will be out of you know this situation of hunger and poverty. But let's get to the honorable minister now. I'm sure you want to respond to that, but I want you to you know make something clear to me because I was not in Brazil, you were in Brazil. What was reported is the fact that the $2.5 billion which the president presided over the signing was a letter of intent. Just let us know. It's not yet a legal contract. What is there anything that we need to do for this not to just end in the air, for it to be visible to Nigerians?
Thank you very much. You got it right, and there's nothing to hide there. It was clearly written in broad daylight. It was a letter of intent, and that a commitment on the part of our partners in Brazil to pursue this deal. What are the next steps? The next steps are one, by Q1 2025, a team from JBS, BRF, and Bestway are coming to Nigeria to do an exploration, to have engagement with us, and then begin to do some feasibility studies regarding the siting of those projects. In the meantime, we in Nigeria here, the delegation that went to Brazil and met them, we are not resting on our oars. We are doing a lot of legwork. Professor Kuta just mentioned that His Excellency the Governor of Niger State, who was also at that signing ceremony, has already pledged 1.2 million hectares of land. And along the line, if you look at the Sokoto-Badagry Highway, there are a number of unutilized dams. And we do believe that in terms of suitability, provision, availability of body of waters, vast amount of land, evacuation, etc., that corridor is the most suitable. But we are not saying that other locations in the country are going to be and are not going to be included. So at the moment, this is what is happening. And by that letter of intent, it's indicated that yes, they have listened to us, we have agreed that they will pursue that. Now, it is not a legally binding document. Let me say this up front. Now, but it has indicated that those investors have seen the potentials in this country. And what are those potentials? Number one, everyone knows about the population of this country, more than 200 million Nigerians. Number two, the issue of climate. Similarities between Brazil and Nigeria are just too good in terms of weather system, in terms of the soil, in terms of the ecology, etc., etc. The cattle that we are going to use will be a combination of the Brazilian breed, which is now being used by those plants, and Nigerian breed. So the Brazilian breed will survive in this country. I have personally run with some of them on my farm. The issue of crops, etc., etc. In this country, just like the professor said, we're dealing with peasant farmers who have no opportunity for upscaling. The issue here today is about application of scientific methods in terms of soil analysis, to be able to know what crops do those where, what kind of fertilizer you blend, you apply, etc., etc. Now, this is not happening in a vacuum. Remember that the Presidential Livestock Reform Importation Committee is going to transform the entire Nigerian livestock system. We are not going to remain as pastoralist. We are not going to remain with low-yielding cattle. In terms of our cows today, hardly give you more than 1.1 liters, while the world average is almost 15 liters. There are cows that do almost 90 liters. In fact, there is the record holder, the Girolando, is doing 127 liters per day. So it's not going to happen in a vacuum. What I'm saying here is that the environment is now ripened. It's now ripe for these companies to come in, and we are going to pursue it. So as far as we're concerned, that document is a signal that there is confidence in the Nigerian economy. Investors are coming. But we are now doing the legwork to receive them Q1 2025, to continue to explore, do feasibility studies, the architecture of the investment, etc., etc., is going to happen. And as these things unfold, we are going to keep you posted, we'll keep Nigerians updated, and then we'll see at every stage we are going to communicate.
How ready are we to deal with this, by the way? Because it's one thing to have investors pledging to come in. Let's say we manage to convince them to eventually make it happen. Are we ready? Nigeria's bureaucracy can be a problem sometimes. And we've seen in times past where, that bureaucratic bottleneck makes investors say, no, look, we can't deal with this. We've had situations where corruption becomes an issue. Are we ready to deal with these so that we can make the most of this deal, this potential deal?
We are ready, because this is not happening in a vacuum again. Let me say that part of this delegation, and a very, very important driver, is the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission. Nigerian Investment, NIPC. They are in the driving seat. Number two, the component also involves Nigerian investors. It's not as if they are coming here just to invest. The local Nigerian entrepreneurs are part of it. If I give an example, if you have a blade of scissors, is it the upper blade or the lower blade that cuts? Can you tell me? Which of them cuts? Which of them cuts?
Both.
Both of them. One cannot cut. The lower cannot cut alone, and the upper cannot cut alone. So the idea here is that both of them have to complement. And the Nigerian investors are also convinced and they are ready. But the details will come out as this is unfold. But just to tell you that the issue of corruption and every bureaucracy they're talking about has already been taken care of. We are sure the NIPC is in a proper footing as an SPV. I mean, as a government parastatal to drive this. Here again, the Livestock Ministry is already on ground, and we are part of this process. Number three, Professor Kuta talked about the Presidential Livestock Implementation Reform Committee. And that document is there. And this is part of the outcomes of that implementation. And if you see the rapidity of this development, from the committee that was headed by Jega under the former governor of Kano State, to the national committee headed by, co-authored by Professor Jega, and the CNC, the president and CNC was the chairman, Professor Jega was the co-chairman, and distinguished Professor Kuta was the secretary. The creation of the Ministry of Livestock Development, the appointment of a minister, then the designation of an office, the location of an office for that ministry to take off. Look at the rapidity. It tells you that the issue of bureaucracy has completely been conquered.
All right, Honorable Minister.
And things are moving at lightning speed.
All right. Let's put you on hold, Honorable Minister, just so that we pay some bills. We take a break. When we return, this conversation still has some way to go. Please stay with us.
The business environment, to be honest with you, has been extremely hard on most Nigerian women's businesses. And of course, hard for a number of reasons. There is no way you would increase or move subsidy and increase the price of fuel that it doesn't have a counter effect. It has been very challenging for so many women. I know that a lot of them have cried in one way or the other to us to find ways of intervening. But that is not to say that it is all doom and gloom. We will still have a few percentage of women that are thriving in this economy, but we hope that we'll be able to get a larger percentage. One of the things I've seen with even our local purchases now is that people are buying more made in Nigerian options of food, of clothing, and so on and so forth than the imported. So that again is helping some of our industries thrive. Surprisingly, the telecommunications is still doing well. And the reason is very simple. A lot of people are going for online options of skills in terms of training, communications, even remote working. And so you will see that people that provide services around those areas also thrive. But I think at the end of the day, it's about partnerships, collaboration, and influencing power from especially the private sector and even the public sector. But we really need the public sector to drive a number of things, especially policies, because the public sector has the national spread above even whatever we can do in our own small way. What has happened over the years is that different, even the government, for example, is being pulled from different angles by all these stakeholders. We need to harness ourselves to have strategic focus areas. And we should all be moving in the same direction, not using a competitive approach, but a collaborative approach. Secondly, in collaboration, we need to move with large clusters of decision makers. Instead of, the process of reaching out to individuals is painstakingly long and it takes time. And so we need to engage these stakeholders on a larger platform. I think it's very important to identify where you can get help in your own little way. And one of the things I've realized is that when you operate in silo, it is difficult for you to lift yourself out of the situation. Identify ways you can do what you are doing in a simpler way. And if what you are doing is no more profitable, why not find out what can you do in the meantime that will help you? You need to think outside the box and then connect. What you can do is also identify people and become a cluster to provide a service that ordinarily you cannot do alone.
This Sunday, live Sporty TV. Real Sociedad versus Real Betis. Watch live on Sporty TV. Brought to you by Sportybet. Play with champions.
One of the better things about this season, now our better times together.
Oyo, time to go.
The no disturb me time. The dramatic time. The exciting time.
But I don't wait for that now.
The nothing fit stop my shine time. With GoTV, it's easy to capture better times. Reconnect and watch GoTV with plenty football, new series, films, cartoon, lower price on Super Plus and more entertainment. Now better season for everybody with GoTV. Love it.
This Toledo. Napoli. Toledo versus Napoli. Live on Sporty TV.
Sportybet sponsors coverage of the Italian Serie A.
All right, welcome back. It's still Good Morning Nigeria, live on the network service of the NTA. And topic this morning is a review of the G-20 summit. Our guest is still very much with us, and I'd like to get to Dr. Omale now. Since we're reviewing the G20 summit, not just about the deal, in the livestock industry, let's talk about some other issues. Like I mentioned earlier, a significant outcome of the G20 summit, is the launch of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. And earlier when the minister spoke, he talked about poverty elimination. And I asked if it's possible to eliminate poverty in a country like ours. And that's because looking at the poverty elimination policies that we have carried in the past in this country. You want to talk about the conditional cash transfer, the government empowerment programs under the framework of the National Social Investment Programs. Many have said have scored very low because the key indicators and then the set goals, they have not actually met any of them. And then the fact that the multidimensional poverty in the country rose to 133 million despite these interventions says a lot. So I'd like you to speak, in that regard, what you think the government can be doing differently, considering the fact that the president has said that, he's going to do his bit in the country to ensure that, hunger and poverty is reduced.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just like you said, the G20 is a very important institution, like I said earlier, within the international system. You could see that China is represented there. You could see the president of the United States. You could see the president of France. You could see India. So most of the large economy are involved. One thing, just like you have said, poverty constitutes a very serious challenge to the world, and that is why at the United Nations, the issue of sustainable development goals, we are in 2024, just 6 years to 2030, and I don't think we have been able to meet up to 35% of meeting the SDGs. So there's a lot of vacuum, there's a lot of room for improvement. Just like I agree with you, most of the poverty eradication programs that we have embarked on over the years, whether it's NAPEP, whether it's seeds, which later became needs, most of our programs have really not been able to make the necessary impact. The poverty gap continue to widen. The inequality between the rich and the poor continue to widen. The out-of-school children. So I agree that most of these poverty eradication programs have really not made the type of impact that we desire. Our only hope is that with this renewed vigor, that Mr. President is putting in, by putting pressure on the G20 to give priority, to have this alliance that will really take on poverty head on. Because yes, we say that we have done a lot in terms of eradicating poverty. But the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of unemployment, there's a lot of poor people around. If you look at the United Nations, UNDP statistics and so on, many Nigerians are still grappling with the issue of poverty. So at the world stage, we need a concerted effort to be able to address this issue of poverty. And the man from the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs made a very, very important point: the issue of reforms of global institutions. And that does dive into the question you have asked me. Currently, within the United Nations and within most of the international global institutions, Africa is not adequately being represented. And I'm happy that Mr. President made this point very, very clear, that there is need to reform these global institutions so that we can have a voice at the table where these issues are being discussed.
All right.
And Mr. President made it very clear that we need to be involved. And then we cannot talk about poverty without looking at the impact of climate change, because climate change is even contributing to the poverty more than anything, especially even in the livestock sector that we are talking about.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mali. Let's head back to Lagos. And Dr. Chimi, I just wanted you to chip in. You know that key discussions also included need for equitable global taxation reforms, debt restructuring, and increased climate funding. How did we fare, in your opinion, in these areas?
Thank you very much. There can be no gainsaying that on quite a number of fronts, Nigeria in particular and Africa in general has not done very well. And this is not about the current government. It's a trend that has been with us for a very long time, and I doubt that it will disappear. There's a magic wand that will just make everything disappear at once. So to answer your question directly, there is room for substantial improvement in the state of affairs in these areas that you have mentioned. Let me say by way of a prescription that Mr. President must go the next logical step after this. You see, we live in a world of region. In fact, in a sense, the G20 itself is a regional organization. Now, in this regional organization, however, the interests are not homogeneous. These members, these 20 countries, 19, AU and the EU are regional bodies. They will, after this session, after the G20, all dissolve back into other multilateral organizations and institutions where the agenda may not necessarily be consistent with what Africa and Nigeria in particular needs at this point in time. So the next step forward that I will suggest and strongly recommend to Mr. President and his team is that we need to begin to also look inwards. There is a need to establish independent, sustainable engines of growth and development that is within at least a substantial control of Nigeria and its allies on the continent. And this is why the presence of the AU in the G20 is also critical. Nigeria, as Dr. Male mentioned, is a very important member of the G20 and, of course, of the AU. We need to go back and look at arrangements like the African Continental Free Trade Area at the continental level and the other regional building blocks and begin to tackle these issues, these ones that you have mentioned, along with many, many others. There should be specialized templates to address our peculiarities because 50, 60 years of experimenting with received wisdom and models from the North has not gotten us anywhere. I know that the bulk of the responsibility stops at the national table. I said that before, and when your co-moderator made that point by way of a critique of my position, which I appreciate, is telling me what I have already said, which is that we have the onus lies on us to rediscover and move forward to address those gaps and deficits at the level of the national or, if you like, domestic political economies. But as somebody who is an expert with a focus on the international, I am saying that there is a need to strategize in such a manner that the efforts at the domestic levels, however the shortcomings, will find necessary complements at the international. So regional and continental arrangements are very key here. Finally, let me say, since we are talking about investment, that we must begin to also query the kinds of investments that we attract. More often than not, you'll find out that these regions and countries that have broken through, they did that precisely because they laid out the terms and conditions upon which investment will operate in their immediate climes. I think that that gap is missing more often than not in our own case and in the case of Africa as a whole. And that's why I'm very excited that the Honorable Minister, take us through some of the steps that we are to expect going forward. And I am sure, given the caliber of the eminent personalities on the livestock programs and strategies of the federal government, we will begin to inculcate these things. But we need to widen the base. For example, this government has established a Ministry of Marine and the Blue Economy. Now, the whole world is going towards the maritime sector. What are the character and nature of the investment that we are attracting into that sector? These new sectors and emerging areas are the ones that are capable of pulling us out of poverty, the way that the traditional and conventional sectors that we have been toying with over these past 50, 60 years cannot do. Because if you ask me, these sectors are now saturated. But Nigeria has very huge prospects in the maritime sector. We are also looking at the maritime sector at the Institute. That is just one. I am sure that if we put together the necessary complements of experts, we will be able to identify these new areas, not just for Nigeria, but also for the whole of Africa. And then we can begin to now redefine the character and the nature of investments that we will be dealing with and engaging with going forward. Because I am sure, like I said before, that if we were to run with the traditional and conventional sectors, the rules of engagement will change very little. And we will be here again for the next 5, 6, 10 years talking about lack of progress in this area, lack of progress in the others. But these new sectors give us an opportunity to call the shot, so to speak.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ichimi. Talking about progress, the G20 summit, also looked at the focus on education, and the president was very emphatic, in his comments there when he spoke. And I'll quote him quickly, Honorable Minister. The president said, "We have too many children out of school, and we know that education is a way out of hunger and poverty. That is why we're designing ways and incentives to keep these children in school, and we need your support." All right. So the first question on the mind of the average Nigerian is, what role are we playing in reducing the number of out-of-school children? I'm targeting this question to you, Honorable Minister Meha. I know you're from Meha local government in Borno State, which also deals with a certain percentage of out-of-school children. Away from the Ministry of Livestock now, what would be your recommendation in dealing with the out-of-school children? At the moment, figure put at almost 20 million. In dealing with this, just so we can, deal with hunger and poverty.
Thank you very much. Well, I want to see myself as a Nigerian, but if I have to have a local government, that local government is in Adamawa State. But nonetheless,
okay.
And I think there are practical steps, bold practical steps, very confident steps taken by this administration in the sense of the formation of the out-of-school commission and the appointment of an executive secretary to deal with that. And a lot of progress have also been made in terms of identification, relocation of some of these children, as well as the integration of the Sangaya school system alongside Western education. These are practical steps. But yes, we are talking about out-of-school children. We need to go to the basis. Why are these children out of school? Why are they roaming the streets? Children do not fall from heaven. They don't come out of trees. They have parents. What exactly is happening at that level? We need to drill down and find out exactly what is happening. If you do that, you discover that, yes, the social structure in the country, for instance, have no regulation in terms of number of children one can have. And parental responsibility, therefore, has not been very, very effective in terms of managing these children, keeping them under the shade of their parents. So the tendency here is for people to have children without commensurate parental responsibilities and obligations. Therefore, that is the loose end. That is the loose end. And therefore, we actually need to look at that level. Look, every parent must take responsibility of the child they have brought to this world. That is basic. That is basic. And if it requires some level of enforcement, I think an attempt should be made to enforce that. Number one. Number two, the responsibility again is about the issue of educational system. The educational system should make it in such a way that every school-going child must be in school, whether the parents can afford or cannot afford. And I do believe that we have resources in this country at that primary school level to offer free education. Now, the other aspect that we need to look at, for instance, it's been experimented some few years back, and I have this empirical evidence that once the school feeding system was introduced, a number of school-going children who were not in school before found themselves going to that school simply because of the availability of meals. So it is that issue of lack of adequate feeding at home, drive children away to wander to look for what to eat. Now that the school feeding system was introduced, those age-going school children not in formally enrolled school found themselves going to school because of that attraction. The incentive was there. So, and I do believe that that is one net that probably, if you restore the school feeding system, you also have the tendency of fishing out a lot of those wandering children to go to school, and therefore they can be enrolled, whether they come from that local government or whether they come from those cities or not. So I do believe that we have enough resources, and with the recent commission introduced by Mr. President, an appointment of a leadership, and that commission is doing wonderful things to take these children away from the streets and take them to school. Now, I do know that, and I've read it, and that's subject for confirmation. Some of the children that were taken out of the children were handed over to their local governments. Now, assuming somebody comes from Sokoto, from Zamfara, in Kaduna, and Abuja, without any known home, sleeping on the streets, no definite meal, no definite place, no reference point, no address, these children should be returned to their homes of origin. Because apparently there's a serious social dislocation. A child from Sokoto, from Zamfara, from Adamawa, from Borno, found in another part of the country with no good parental care, with with no next of kin near him, an adult to take care of him, is very, very vulnerable. And that's a breeding ground for crisis, for crime, etc., etc. So that's my take on that.
All right, thank you, Honorable Minister. Let me just take the last 1 minute to get to Professor Kuta. What opportunities for future collaboration and cooperation did you spot during the G20 summit? And I ask because you're secretary, and that means you will be making notes and taking notes of everything that happens around.
Well, the first takeaway is political will. Mr. President has not left anyone in doubt that his commitment is total. He declared to the investors, and I listened attentively. He said, we are embarking on reforms that will accommodate investors in our country. For the livestock sector, I am the chairman of the Presidential Livestock Reforms Implementation Committee, and Professor Jega is my co-chairman. He said it to let them know the import that is ready. And for those players, they're not beggars. For them to have confidence in coming to invest in Nigeria is driven by Mr. President. So therefore, for me, the leader has demonstrated that is ready. And I believe that is a good window of opportunity for Nigeria.
Professor Kuta, thank you very much. Yes. Honorable Minister, we are almost out of time.
Just before we hear the final words from the Honorable Minister, I'd like Dr. Adoyi to just, in 15 seconds, your final words as we round off.
Yeah, I think we should continue engaging with the rest of the world. We should continue, just like others have said here, this type of multilateral engagements are very, very important. And Mr. President is also going again to France for a bilateral talk. So we should continue.
Okay. Dr. Ichimi, in Lagos, your final thoughts as we round off. 10 seconds.
Yes, I want to zero on the issue of out-of-school children. I am very passionate about it. I think that the state owes these children, 20 million plus of them, a very important constitutional responsibility. I think we should look at our social investment trust system to accommodate these children. I think we have walked away from the structures that we used to have, and those structures that used to accommodate this kind of situations, and we need to go back to them. For example,
thank you. There'll be no time to take the examples. I'm sure there'll be another time. You know, we'll have you on another program.
Honorable Minister to tell us what other prospects we could take away from the G20 summit as your final
my final thoughts on this. And let me say this. I've read and heard and benefited personally on my farm from Brazilian livestock transformation over the years. with the kind of reform that is happening in this country, there is an opportunity for multidimensional prosperity for Nigeria. Once we unbundle the livestock sector, there are huge value chains that will bring multidimensional progress.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister of Livestock Development, Edie Mokhtar Meha. Many thanks for being our guest on the program.
You're welcome.
And we do sincerely appreciate you. Of course, looking forward to visit your local government, Meha, in Adamawa State. Thank you so much. And of course, Professor Muhammad Kota Yahaya, Secretary, Presidential Livestock Implementation Committee. Many thanks for being our guest. We do sincerely appreciate you.
It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
All right, Dr. Adoyi Matthew O'Malley, International Affairs Analyst. It was a pleasure to have you again. Thank you so much for always being with us. And of course, Dr. Godwin Ichimi, your examples will come in another program. Associate Professor and Acting Director, International Cooperation and Public Affairs, Nigerian Institute for International Affairs, NIIA. Many thanks for being our guest. We appreciate you for your insights. All right, so that's Good Morning Nigeria this Wednesday. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I'm Ian Ray John. Remain tuned to the NTA.
And I'm Victor, so have a great day.